Hello, folks. I'm back to give you a little bit of my comic collecting history. It turns out that that history fits pretty nicely into two segments. There's 1986 and prior, and then post 1986. So in this video, I'm going to cover sort of the first portion of that history, so the era of 1971 until 1986. So I was born in 71. As I mentioned in my previous video, I was a collector of many things as a child. Of course, comic books were one of the categories that typified that activity of mine, back in those days. I can't really remember exactly what got me started in comic books. I can't really remember what was the first comic book I ever purchased. My brain doesn't seem to do a very good job with those sorts of details. But so my memory's a little hazy on how this actually got started, but I do know that my off-the-rack purchasing started, I would say, somewhere around 1977 when I was about 6 or 7 years old. I've got a few things here to show you. So this book here, as I'll talk about later, I've gotten rid of a lot of my off-the-rack purchases back in the day. I'll cover sort of some of that in the next video, but this one always stuck with me. So when I think back about, books that are sort of seared into my memory, this is one. So a killer, George Perez cover, Avengers 161. This is my off-the-rack copy, and so I still have it, obviously. This always, to me, for reasons I can't quite explain, has been a very powerful cover. I mean, you have to overlook a couple of things, right? This is the notorious eight-legged ant cover. If you look closely, old George drew the ants here with 8 legs, but other than that, who's nitpicking? But I mean, look at Scarlet Witch there. I mean, she is just in agony, right? She's just in total agony. Someone help this woman. Another cover. This is another off-the-rack copy from back in that era. Captain America 272. Who do we have here? Zek, a nice Zek cover. This never occurred to me until I was sort of getting my thoughts together for this video. Why has this... Here's another cover that I've kept all these years that just has continued to resonate in me. Another cover where someone is being attacked and eaten on by vermin. It's very horror-esque. This has to have something to do with why I wound up being an EC collector. This sort of reads, almost EC horror vibe, even though it's a Captain America book. But this was an off-the-rack book. Sorry, I've got some notes over here I'll refer to occasionally just to make sure I don't forget to say anything that I wanted to make a point of, because I've decided I'm going to do all these videos in one take fashion, one and done. So if it gets a little rough because of that, I apologize in advance. So I was a Marvel zombie. So I was a Marvel comic collector. My sweet spot back then in that era, pre-1986, I was collecting kind of the wheelhouse Marvel hero titles. Spider-Man, Iron Man, Daredevil, Fantastic Four, I guess were the big books for me. I didn't buy every issue off the rack, starting in 77. It was a little sporadic, but I got most of those titles. I was also big into sort of other Spidey-related titles, like I was big into Marvel Team Up, bought a lot of Marvel Team Ups. What else? For whatever reason, I wasn't really into X-Men, Thor, Doctor Strange. Those didn't seem to resonate as much with me. But that's kind of what I was collecting in terms of comic books. My off-the-rack purchasing started, I would say, tailing off around 1985, and then pretty much came to an end in 1986. Some of the last books that I remember buying off the rack were that was the era of the Marvel miniseries books. Secret Wars, right? For instance, I still have my off-the-rack. This is a sweet... high-grade copy of Secret Wars number 8. I kept this for posterity just as, sentimental reasons to sort of, again, capture that era. So Marvel still have that copy. This is the last book off the rack that I have here with me now. So this is sort of, I don't think there was much comic purchasing going on by me after sort of this particular sort of time frame here, and we're talking March 1985. Probably bought a few things into 1986, but this was sort of the end. Now let me back up a little bit also. So I was collecting the Marvel comics, between 77 and 85, 86. I was buying off the rack stuff. I was also working on buying back issues of those types of titles that I mentioned. Even working slightly, obviously back through the Bronze Age and dabbling slightly in Silver Age books when I could find them. There were two, but I grew up in a small town in Georgia. And I would not say that it was easy to find back issues. There were two stores in particular that were sort of my go-to shops. There was a place called Hard Times. It's just sort of a miscellaneous catch-all kind of junk store. It was in a town called Bogart, Georgia. And the guy happened to sell comic books and Mad magazines. So I would go, I remember, box diving on weekends through the stacks sort of in this guy's shop. There was also a used bookstore in Atlanta that I would occasionally make a trip into, a store called the Book Nook. It actually still exists in Atlanta, although it's in a different location. But both of these places, right, just had that classic walk in and just the essence of decaying pulp. You all know and love that smell. You know what I'm talking about, right? So I have vivid memories of that smell and spending time digging through the boxes in those two shops. So I mentioned Mad Magazine. So in that same era, again, I can't remember the exact sequencing, but in that same era, I was collecting Mad Magazine. Something got me turned on to Mad Magazine. This is not an unusual story, right? I've heard many people tell tales of, collecting Mads back in the day. And my off-the-rack purchases of Mad were in that same sort of time window, starting in about 1977-ish and continuing through about 85, 86. This is my off-the-rack copy of Mad 195, right? December 77. So this is one of the very first off-the-rack Mads that I would have been buying. This is just this is one of the small handfuls of Newman-free covers. So a small handful of Mad magazines do not have Alfred E. Newman on the cover. This is one of them. Keep this out of the hands of your parents, everybody, right? Be warned. And sort of kind of to bookend that, I know I had a few after this. I probably stopped buying Mad off the rack slightly sooner than I stopped buying comics off the rack. This is one of the last I can remember buying off the rack. This is my off the rack copy. Mad 246, just an awesome Jack Davis cover. As I'll talk about in some other subsequent video, Jack Davis, as far as I'm concerned, Jack Davis is the man. So I have purged a lot of my old off-the-rack Mad magazines, but I kept basically all the Jack Davis covers because he's the man. I'm telling you, Davis is the man. So this is about when I stopped buying 84-ish, when I stopped buying Mad magazines. Again, I was, though, similar to comic books, during this era, I was working back through back issue purchases, back into the early 70s and 60s at mainly those same two places, Hard Times, Book Nook. And I really, at that time, had no idea that Mad was a comic book at one time. And one of the sort of most vivid Christmas present memories I have from childhood. I can't remember exactly the year. It must have been, 79, 78, 79, 80, maybe. I open up a box. It's Christmas. I open up a box. Obviously, I can't remember at that time if I was still in the Santa Claus mode or if I had or if the cover had been blown and I knew it was my parents. But nonetheless, one of the presents under the tree was this comic book right here. This exact copy that I'm holding. Mad number 9. I still have no idea where they found this comic book in small town Georgia in 79 or 80. I don't know if they arranged one of those bookstore owners to get this thing through some connection they had or something, but Mad number 9, I was like, man, wow, Mad, there was a comic book called Mad, that predated, the Mad magazine stuff I was collecting. I mean, mind was blown, right? Unbelievable. And then I guess my reaction to that comic book right here was so powerful as far as my parents were concerned. That ushered in. I'm sure they're like, okay, this is excellent because now we've got a go-to. If we just want to keep wowing, little Eddie, let's just keep hitting him with old Mad comic books. So a few more followed in, maybe birthday present. I can't remember which order these things came in, but these are the copies that I'm holding here were subsequent presents from my parents. For various occasions where presents were necessary. Mad number 6, Mad number 10, and of course the famous Connect the Dots cover, Mad number 18. And this thing is about as rough as it can be. Water damage all around. Of course, as usual, the dots are connected with pencil. I mean, what a wreck of a book, man! But I just love it. I just love this book. Of course, I've upgraded all of these, but naturally, I'm keeping these childhood gift copies from my parents. Just so meaningful to me back then. So now again back to 86. So it's 1986, and I'm in high school at that point. Other interests started taking over, and as perhaps happened to some of us, the comic books became less of a focus, and I just sort of stopped collecting in about 86. My comic books were stored in a cedar chest. I was at my parents with them at the time, right? So I stored my comic books in a cedar chest. I think all the Mad magazines were in cardboard boxes. I did a pretty good job bagging and boarding, but all the Mad magazines were in cardboard boxes in the basement, and that's sort of where I sort of my interest phased away from comics. Little did I know in 86 that I had purchased my last comic book of any form for 25 years. The next comic book I purchased would be in 2012. So I will pick back up there in 2012. Basically it's when the collecting fire reignited for me. I'll pick it up there in the next video. See you then.